go stare at some clouds.
Hi, I'm Kira Magrann. I am a queer non-binary game designer in Columbus, Ohio. I have written recently A Cozy Den, which features lesbian snakes making their den as cozy as possible in wintertime. And also Something is Wrong Here, which is kind of an atmospheric, emotional love letter to David Lynch movies. So, but I have a lot of other games. Those are just recent. Oh no!
Oh no!
Yeah.
For everybody listening at home, that was we can hear Kira and the rest of us, but not AC. What you did not hear was AC saying, "You cannot hear me."
It's true. In the meantime, should we continue like intros?
Yeah, let's see if this fixes it. I think we should be alright. There might be a bit of echo, everybody. I'm so sorry. I fixed the problem from this morning where you could only hear me, and then I unfixed it. So, we'll see. All right, we can hear everybody. Yes, 10 out of 10. All right. I'm so sorry, Kira, if you want to go again.
Oh, that's okay. What did they already hear me, and then maybe someone else should
Maybe
go?
I'll say hello.
Yeah.
My name is AC. Thank you. Sorry about the technical issues, and this is already going much better than this morning. If you guys were here for that, thank you for joining us. I'll pass this on to Wilson now. If you would like to begin your intro.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Hi. So Wilson Zorn, up in Portland, Oregon, transgender, so here. And the game I published just before is At the Hands of an Angry God, and sort of a thing around utopia building, in short, very short. And then something coming out next is Breakdown, which is basically protagonists in extreme stress who tap into their emotional state to enact what they do. I think that's the intro part. Was there something else with that? Oh, they, pronoun. So, yeah.
Sweet, yeah, and I love At the Hands of an Angry God, and
Thanks.
I got a sneak peek at Breakdown, and I am very excited for when that comes out as well. Jay, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi. I'm Jay Dragon. You are welcome to use any pronouns you. That is not true. Hi, I'm Jay Dragon. Please ask me what pronouns you should use for me. Wow, I can't believe I just forgot my own pronouns. I'm a queer lyrical designer. Sally. I'm most well known for Sleepaway, which is
You've gone a bit robot-y. Can you
Trat? I don't know.
You sound okay now.
Okay. I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm just gonna. I'm sorry. I'm a little bit of a robot. I promise I'm not. Please ask for friends. Excuse me. I am a queer lyrical designer in the Hudson Valley. I wrote Sleepaway, which is a Belonging Outside Belonging horror game about a group of summer camp counselors taking care of kids at a summer camp. And I'm running an upcoming Kickstarter called Water Home, which is launching just for a week, about traveling animal folk and the way the seasons change around them.
Yes, which the play kit for Wonder Home is out right now, right? They can find it on your itch.io, and it's literally incredible. I had to run and go show my sibling and be like, "You're gonna love this, and we're gonna play it together, and it's gonna be amazing." So, yes. Super excited for that as well. Lucian, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Yes, hi. I'm Lucian Kahn. I am a game designer in Brooklyn, New York. I'm most known for Visigoths versus Molgoths, which is a tabletop role-playing game and dating sim about the conflicts and romances among the warriors who sacked ancient Rome and 20th century spooky teens set in a shopping mall in Los Angeles in 1996. I have a whole bunch of games They're all most of them are on necromancy.itch.io. I am trans and gay and Jewish and probably a whole lot of other things. He, him pronouns.
Sweet. And yeah, since I don't think I mentioned it, my pronouns are they, them, and she, her, whichever. And yeah, and you just won the award for what was it? The most innovative 2020 Indie Groundbreaker Award for If I Were a Lich Man.
I did. That was yesterday, so I'm still getting used to the fact that I just won something. But yeah, I did. I just won an award yesterday. So thank you, IGDN, for the award.
Yeah, well, it's a very good game, though. I have to say, my favorite game of yours is probably Muse Cruise. I have a 17-year-old cat, and she's been going on a lot of retirement vacations lately, and it's been very fun.
Oh my god, I love that. So Muse Cruise, for those who don't know, is like my smallest game. It's like really tiny. It's you play it with your cat. It's a 2-player game for one person and one cat. And it's about your cat's vacations. So if you need something to do with your cat, Muse Cruise.
It's fantastic. So we're here. Obviously, we're all very queer, and we're here to talk about what it's like to be queer in the RPG industry. If we can start out maybe with you, Kira, and the sort of, I don't know, really, it's kind of hard to see sometimes the queer rep in your games, especially Lesbosnakes. I think, I'm not sure if that's, is that one supposed to have some gay sort of elements to it, or?
Yeah, super gay. I slightly regret not putting lesbian in the title, but I have like so many of my games are basically just about lesbians. Like I think I like lesbians maybe. And am one. But yeah, I don't know really know how to kind of frame how to be or what it's like being queer in the TTRPG industry. I've been making games probably for 10 years, just only recently publishing them for a few years. And I've been playing for 25 years. I've been in role-playing game, like a long time. I think over time it's been more overtly accepted to make games overtly about gay things. But a lot of them are still kind of like independently published, which is fine, actually. I don't know, it'd be cool to see mainstream stuff, but I prefer independent stuff of all different kinds of media, like film, TV, stuff that's made by people who aren't the mainstream status quo. So it's cool. That's cool so far, and it's nice to be able to have creative control over what you're making. Like I like being able to just make what I want to make, how I want to make it, and not have someone just tell me it doesn't have like enough crunchy mechanics or enough other types of characters or whatever for balance. Just like kind of what I want to make. I want to have a bunch of lesbian snakes characters be in a den doing domestic things together. That's just what I want to do. So.
And it's absolutely fantastic. And I gotta say, as someone who works at Indie Press Revolution, I'm also a pretty big fan of indie things. I was also reading through your other game that we have here, Something Is Wrong Here. And there's a lot of there's a pretty long history of queer themes in horror, and that one especially, as I was reading through it, there is one card in particular, the confrontation card, that has you sort of confronting your image in a mirror, and it's just there's all these wrong things about it. And as I was reading through that, I was like, yes, gender. That would be that's what gender is. Is looking in the mirror and being like, that's supposed to be me, and I look and that's my brain's in there. I was wondering if that was intentional, that sort of the themes you were going for with the game.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, horror as a genre, horror is one of my favorite genres, maybe my favorite genre, for some of the reasons you kind of highlighted. Like horror is a genre that we're allowed to talk about things where we're not allowed to talk about in other places, or confront taboo ideas that are maybe not okay to socially talk about, or even like ethically think or morally think are okay, like within the culture we live in. So I think, yeah, I mean, that's totally intentional and something is wrong here. And I think horror that deals with identity is like some of my favorite horror, because it always kind of helped me see some things about my own identity and question things about myself. I think that's really valuable in the horror genre. So yeah, and yeah, I mean, like David Lynch movies are, I guess, horror. Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? Like supernaturally strange and uncomfortable. And there's a lot of interesting gender stuff in Mulholland Drive, which is one of the big inspirations behind it. There's lesbians. There's also like, who am I? Am I who I think I am? Can I trust myself? Is my identity fractured? Can I be more than one person at the same time? I think that's all very, very queer thinking.
Yeah, and I know J-Dragon, in your game Sleepaway, which is also a horror-themed game, the choices for gender in that game are absolutely fantastic to me as someone who is like just sort of figuring out what gender might be or mean. I really enjoyed reading through all the gender options in Sleepaway.
Thank you. Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about queerness in my work, because like I am a queer designer and my work has a lot of queerness in it. But I think a lot of that comes from a desire to accurately replicate like what it is like to live, I think, for me. And so there's a lot of queerness, and like I'm invested in showing a lot of different ways of queerness. Like I get kind of frustrated sometimes when people frame the gender as sleepaway. It's like the objectively correct way to look at gender, because it's not. It is like a particular paradigm in a particular social context, and that a lot of my games are about thinking about different ways to represent that. But they're also just as much invested in like houselessness or like precarity or like sobriety or mental illness, like physical illness, and kind of exploring themes that feel very relevant, that kind of become intertwined fundamentally with awareness. That in a lot of ways, Sleepaway is just as much a game about mental illness and sort of and trauma and the cyclical generational nature of trauma as it is about painting this queer utopia. And so that kind of juxtaposition, a lot of times anything labeled as dark, but I feel like, especially even like my like, I don't know, like I write games that are oftentimes like lighthearted but have this really weird dark edge to them, and I think oftentimes that's because I'm just not comfortable with things that are like, if Sleepaway didn't have the monster, it would feel wrong because it's a summer camp, but not having the monster is not how it feels, and having the monster without the queerness would feel wrong to me. So I think it was kind of that impulse.
Can you repeat that very last bit? You went very robot-y for a second there.
I'm so sorry. I just said, what do you call? Having the summer camp without the monster, having just the queer utopian summer camp without the monster would feel just as wrong as having a monster without sort of the queerness of the camp. And that's kind of impulse for me, is that the two of them are intertwined.
Yeah, and it's it's a really fantastic game. Sorry, I'm also monitoring the YouTube chat. For people who are listening, if you want to ask questions in the YouTube chat, you're totally free to. I'll be watching and I will pull for them as we go. I also, for Wilson, I was looking through At the Hands of an Angry God, which also deals with sort of utopia, but with a much more they tend to fail a lot in At the Hands of an Angry God, but as I was reading through it, the thing that stood out to me immediately at the beginning, you say how you're very purposefully using the pronoun they throughout the book, which I really like, and as a way to sort of represent and make your games queer friendly. That was really cool to me.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, there's even some linguistic precedent. Not that needs to matter, but yeah, I guess it's just briefly to that. To be honest, I don't think I think a lot, and probably not even enough, about inclusiveness in game design. To be completely honest, it's not like I saying that I'm completely not thinking about it, but you know, it's to be honest, usually not foremost in the games I'm thinking of making. And I think a lot of that is that for me, for role playing, a lot of it was actually a way to experience why are the cisgendered regular people all that way, you know. So I often probably think of it inside out from who I am. But to your point, yeah, I think that it does matter as to how we interact with what we read, and how, who we, you know, whether we see ourselves at all there. And you know, certainly I think it's super powerful in a unfortunate way that he was a default. And I'm not, you know, denigrating writers who do that because they can't break mentally from the fact that it's been the norm. But on the other hand, you know, I think it's wrong to embrace and perpetuate it. So
Yeah, totally. Um, I know for sure my younger sibling also always uses they them pronouns, and so as I got this job here at IPR just recently this year, and we've been looking at a lot more indie games because they have a ton of Dungeon and Dragons books because that's sort of the introduction. But as we've been looking at more of these indie games and finding them so just sort of friendly and welcoming towards queer identities in a lot of ways. We've been able to definitely expand the collection a lot more. It just feels nice to open a book and have they there, at least for me. I know, Lucian, you are the creator of one of my siblings' favorite books that I have brought home for them, which is Visigoths versus Molgoths, which they are obsessed with, and they play it all the time over Discord with their friends.
I love that. How old is your sibling?
They're 17 years old.
Yeah, it always makes me really happy to hear that that teens are playing Visigoths versus Molgoths, because it's sort of it's a little bit of a love letter to my own teen experience in the 90s growing up in Los Angeles. And like, I was very much a grunge rock kid. I was like hanging out at goth clubs once I was old enough to go. And a lot of the stuff in that game is really about my own teen experience, but then like reimagined through levels of, you know, surrealism and alternate universe stuff, right? So it actually makes me really happy when like current teens are going to my like weird 90s like time travel mall and are finding it like fun and relatable. That I just think that's really fun and cool.
I mean, yeah, it's I mean, it's so fun to just because we have a mall right next to our childhood home, so we definitely hung out there a whole bunch,
Yeah.
and so they have sort of created this alternate universe where that mall is sort of the feature of this, and it's really fantastic and fun. Um, so yeah, I was also wondering if anybody has any thoughts about um, making things queer friendly. I think there's a lot of space to uh, sort of not experience, but sort of investigate, look into yourself and your identity. I talked a little bit about that with Something Is Wrong here with Kira's game, and how you guys sort of, I think, make your games in a way that people can explore that part of themselves while they're playing it. Anybody has any thoughts?
I mean, I can talk for a second longer about Visigoths versus Molgoths. I really wanted to make a whole mall full of NPCs and clerks who were just like a wide variety of types of people, right? So I wanted it to be not only like representing the diversity of Los Angeles, but also just like let's just have a much wider variety of types of people in this mall than you normally see in a list of NPCs in like a Dungeons and Dragons module or something like that, right? So you know, with the gender and sexuality element, I really made sure I was like, okay, let's make sure that we have, you know, we have a lot of bisexuals, because that was like a huge hallmark of 90s alternative culture, right? But also like we have gay, we have lesbian, we have pan, we have like non-binary people, we have genderqueer, which was a more common concept in the late 90s, early 2000s. We have some characters who are gender questioning. It just says they're gender questioning, right? We have characters who are questioning their sexual orientation or all kinds of things, right? So I wanted to sort of put that in there, so that when players sort of open up the NPCs and they see like, who are all of these people, they know right off the bat, oh, okay, well, even though this is the 90s, like this is fake alternate universe 90s, so we have this like extremely sort of gender sexuality diverse set of people who may or may not even know what their own sexual identity or gender identity is, especially since most of them are like 16. So people are exploring that as well. And just like have that as your starting place and your norm. And I think that's really helpful for people. Like, I think, something that I think about a lot in game design is pick lists. I think it's really helpful for people to give them a long list of options and then also say, or something else, right? Because it can be really challenging for some people to come up with possibilities out of nothing, right? So if you instead say like, okay, like here are some of the kinds of people that we have here, right? And then list like 20 kinds of people, and then are like, or also others that I didn't list, right? At least then people have some ideas of things that might be there, as opposed to like, if you don't give a list, then what people tend to do is default to the norm or what's mainstream or what's socially acceptable in whatever context they're in, right? So at least just like here's like 24 NPCs of lots of different genders and sexualities. I think that can help people sort of feel like, oh, I guess in this game, these are things that exist, so we can talk about these things.
Yeah, totally. And actually, jumping off of that, we have a question from Erica Boas. I'm so sorry if I say your name wrong. Anybody in the chat? My mouth is awful at saying words out loud. But Erica Bolas was asking, have any of you considered regular use of neopronouns in the writing of your games, or do you worry that there would be readability concerns? And I know J Dragon in Sleepaway, you have a section about sort of different pronouns people can use.
Yeah, so I'm gonna kind of build off a little bit of what Lucian was talking about, because I have like my own perspective on, I think, the same approach, like the same sort of big thing Lucian is dealing with, and I'm really interested in saying how I approached it. But then also I want to answer that, which is, in Sleepaway, yes, I have the section on pronouns, which is just an enormous pick list of pronouns, which range from like, here are the ones there's ones that you commonly see in society: he, she, they, z. And then I kind of go off into here's some neopronouns, and then I talk about pronoun framing. So one of the pronoun options you can choose among, this was literally just, I went around and asked all my friends and like all my campers for pronouns. Like I just kind of polled them. And like a lot of these are pronouns that my campers or my friends use, where it's like one suggestion is like, my pronouns are your pronouns. So AC, you'd use she or they for me. Lucian, you use he, etc. Another one is like, I don't care because I'm a goblin, or like things like that, where it's just like your pronouns are about in sort of similar spaces, like Flower Court, which is another one of my games, which is on itch, handles it with it uses a gender neutral pronoun throughout the text, like the way Wilson does, but it uses here intentionally because it's about a sort of a
You're going a little bit crackly. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's okay. The flower is about a relationship to gender, and so and sort of like a cyberpunk relationship. And so I wanted a word that was both authentic to queer experiences and comes from there, while also creating that little bit of like, this is a space that's different, and how we like, this is the mainstream pronoun that everyone is using. And in the Flower Court, similarly, one of the instructions in making your characters is to choose pronouns befitting royalty. That's kind of, instead of giving options there, it just says choose pronouns befitting royalty, or choose pronouns befitting cruelty. And so I think similarly to Lucian, I really believe strongly in the power of like the way pick lists can give you the full, like can give you sort of the sense of like in addition to sort of reminding you there are these options out there, gives you the sense of what the game cares about. And like in Sleepaway, there's this approach to what a friend of mine called gender anarchy, where like you can play a character whose gender is rusted sword and who uses he or they pronouns. And are you playing as a trans masculine person who's like a little bit sort of exploring gender outside of the binary? Are you playing as a trans feminine egg who's only starting to figure things out? Are you playing as like, you know, like sort of, are you playing as something else? It doesn't matter, because what matters in the game is that you're a rusted sword and that your pronouns are he or they, and that those can change over time. So it's this approach to gender that does require you to position your relationship with as, which I don't think is how people relate to gender naturally in our society. And so it was fun to push that way.
Yeah, totally. So, if anybody has any thoughts on that, or
maybe just a quick add-on is that I think that, you know, one of the things you mentioned about lists I think is important is the really having the completeness of that list, and the or if it's not appropriate to say and, it could be something, anything else that you know might like that seems remotely related to the fact of doing this game or whatever, is that at least maybe saying why it's framed or why it's limited. And because I think that, you know, at least for me as a player, one of the things I find difficult is the imposition of roles, and the more limited those roles are, the harder it is to, you know, find the relationship to that character or to create that. And so I think, you know, for me, like, you know, I get the idea, of course, of very functional roles like, you know, hunter and gatherer and whatever, you know, razor, whatever, you know, but I think, you know, it's important to have that canvas aspect. And I tend to go very blank canvas, you know, almost like probably too much, I will totally admit to, in terms of what I try to give. And one of the other problems, and now I'm going to throw a question back out, actually, is that one of the things is that for me in playing games with people and testing games and developing games, my books are very hostage. I say books, there's only 2 I'm formally published, but any work I do that I come out is going to be very formally hostage to the players, because for me that's the only way I have to really bring that back of real gameplay. And in my experience, players are almost always, because society is almost always, you know, playing cisgendered characters, playing characters who are white, you know. So, and I'm not going to write a black character, to be honest. You know, I'm going to let somebody else do that, and I'll write what they wrote. You know. So I'm just curious how anybody else deals with some of that in your game populations and development. For me, I feel like it's definitely a challenge. So curious.
Yeah. I think, in partially to answer your question, and bounce off of what Lucian and Jay said, I think it's important. It's always weird answering this question. I'm like, I'm queer. I don't know. How am I designing a queer game? I'm just doing the things that I like. But, and you know, that's part of my culture and part of what I see, right? So sometimes I have to dissect, like, what did I actually put in this game that was queer? And, you know, I think when you're intentionally designing queer stuff, queer games, it could intentionally be queerly designed, right? Or it could just be you know, your game design, your version of game design. I think representation is important, right? So like talking about this pick list and giving people options and having, you know, art that shows like, oh, queer, this game is about queer folks, you are welcome here. And also you know, also looking at the framework of the game is important. Like, how is this game framed in the sense of what is the story that you're telling with this game? Not only who does it include, but what is it about? Like, what is the goal of the game? How does the narrative tell you that it's like about queer living or identity somehow? And what is like the culture that's framed? Like, how does it maybe pick and showcase some of queer culture that, you know, we're a part of. And I think like looking at a cozy den, right? Like I was for that, you know, it's cute and funny that you're playing, you know, people who are half snake monsters, and that you're doing like cozy domestic things in the game that's kind of like feels like a Ghibli type thing. So it gives like that soft queer culture thing that we're kind of familiar with, you know. Now you're like, oh, it's soft and it's cozy and it's maybe cuddling and there's maybe furries there, I don't know. But also that the framework is like lesbians living together in a commune, and how that kind of goes into queer history, like, you know, from when queer people were kind of building communes in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s in the US, and like the domestic disputes that arose from those communes. And so that's kind of like embedded in the story, even though it's kind of like on the surface, oh, this is silly and cute. Like that queer history is embedded in that story. I did that on purpose. And I think like a lot of our games have those narratives lying underneath them in the story of the game, and also in the mechanics themselves. Like you were talking about in Something Is Wrong Here, the mirror. There's like a mirror mechanic where you like look in a mirror consistently. And that, you know, a lot of queer and especially trans folk will be familiar with like the symbolism of a mirror and identity. And like that will mean something maybe to us that will maybe be slightly different to other people. Like it could bring up all kinds of dysphoria and body issues, as well as like the general symbolism of mirrors in horror and in a game, in any kind of story. So I think that there's like devices and mechanics that are like part of queer game design, basically.
I think also, I I'm really answer, and I'm also thinking about the way in which like all games are autobiographical from my perspective. Like all games are always, in kind of almost a boring way, like a game always says something about the person who wrote it, like even if it's like this person's, you know, really homophobic or what have you. But game always says something. And I think that like as queer designers, our games kind of end up with a little bit of that fingerprint, even when we're not intentionally designing a game about queerness. Like Wander Home that's, you know, again, coming out in 1 week, woo, is not a game about queerness. It's got like some queerness within the pick lists. It kind of has a little bit of that approach, but it's a game about being homeless. It's a game about trying to find a relationship with a land when you don't necessarily, like when you know, like when that land has a complicated relationship. And it's kind of that existence, and it's not really about, it's like it's not about queerness the same way Sleepaway is. And I think that's something I wish was a thing people knew how to highlight more, that a game can contain and encourage queerness without trying to make a statement about queerness. That like Sleepaway is me kind of making a pitch on like a version of like an approach to queerness that I wish more people would take. And Wander Home is just sort of me writing a game about completely different things that, yeah, and you know, like it makes clear you can be queer in this game, because like, you know, I don't know, it's not what the game is about, but it's just part of what my life is.
Yeah, totally. We've got a really good question from again, I'm so sorry about pronunciations. Amber Wedig. Do you worry that including alternate gender options as front and center encourages white, insert your other adjective here, players to fall back on caricatures of minorities? And how do you work towards avoiding that? If anyone wants to pick that one up.
One thing that I write about tropes is to kind of familiarize yourself with tropes of different minority groups. Maybe before you're playing the game, or like if you're running the game as a short game at a convention, you can say, oh, please avoid doing these things. But also tropes, there's good and bad ones, right? So I don't think, I don't know, you just kind of include things no matter what. I mean, if you include women in a game, I'm sure someone's going to have like a cis woman's trope of something come up, and like the best thing you can do is try to familiarize yourselves with them and point them out and play. You can put like a little line about that in the book too, like, hey, try to stay away from these ideas, these harmful tropes, you know, when playing. But I don't, you know, you have to include things. If you don't include them, then they won't be included.
Yeah, and there is for people watching, the Avery Alder's game, Dream Askew and Dream Apart has some really good ideas about this sort of thing. But sorry, Lucian, I cut you off.
Oh no, that's fine. I think Kira's advice is good. I also take some cues from a very good game designer and a friend of mine, Cleo Yinsu Davis, has a whole passage in the beginning of a game called The Long Drive Back from Busan, which is about where you play a Korean boy band on a road trip, like doing a tour. And there's a whole part in the instructions of that game telling you that if you're not Korean, right, as a player, but you're playing these Korean characters, don't try to make them particularly Korean in the way that you play them, because then you're going to start doing weird tropey stereotypical things. And part of what Cleo says in this is the kimchi rule, right? There's only one way that you can lose at this game, and it's by bringing up kimchi in the game, right? Because then you're just doing like a cheesy like Korean stereotype thing. Instead, what Cleo advises, and I take this advice in the way that I advise my players to play characters from marginalized groups that they're not in, is if you're not sure how to depict a culture, right? If you're not a member of this culture, if you're not sure how to depict it, don't focus on depicting the culture. Instead, focus on the characters' desires, goals, emotions, relationships. And what will happen is most players will end up playing a more accurate depiction of somebody who is from that group anyway by focusing on some of those things, right? And as you play, right, some things that are relevant to those identities will then come in, but they'll come in a way that is more organic, right? So like, let's take a really like easy example, right? Let's say that you're playing a trans character, you're not trans, right? And this is something that people are nervous about, and they're right to be nervous about it, right? Because there are a lot of tropes, there are a lot of harmful ways you could do this, right? But if you're focusing on, right, what is my character trying to do in this plot, right? What are my character's personal connections, right? What are my character's anxieties about this situation, right? And not sort of focus in on the trans part, right? You're then like building up your character, you're building up a character who has nuance and depth and all of these things. And then you may find, right, as throughout the course of the plot, that the fact that they're trans comes into the situation for some reason organically, right? Maybe like, oh, you arrived in this town and it turns out that, right, you encounter somebody from the town who knew you before when you had a different name and pronouns, and now you're anxious around this person, right? But that's now come up organically, right? And you already have a character who's built up and fleshed out, so it's not just this like weird, awkward, tropey thing. And instead, it's like, oh, well, we know about this character's emotions, we know how this character would feel like having a socially awkward interaction with somebody from their past, right? So I think that sort of that guideline can be really helpful.
I think also one thing I always think a lot about is that I don't write my games for cishet white men. You know, they're not my audience. They're not my audience are predominantly queer people, or people who are sort of invested in who are queer people. My audience is queer people. I'm not marketing to cishet men. And if they want to play, I think I really love how Jamila Najati, Sword Queen Games, handles it, where their perspective is very much like, if you are playing one of their games, they are inviting you into their space, right? Where it's like, if you're a cishet person who wants to like play Sleepaway, you need to figure out how to put your baggage at the door. That's not my job to help you figure that out. If you're going to come in and be a dick, there's nothing I could do to stop you from being a dick, but you've got that's on you. There's no way I can build a game to keep a cishet white man from being an asshole. There's no infrastructure you can make. They're too irritating. And so my approach is very much like, this is not for you. And if you want to come in, you need to check it at the door. And maybe also, I don't know, like while you're here, take a moment and think about like, if a cis guy sits down at my table and really wants to play a trans woman, please, yes, absolutely. I hope somewhere along the line you think about the fact that you really, really care about playing a trans woman, and maybe what that says about your own relationship to gender. But not to say there's no, I don't know, like that's not a bigger moral point. That's just like, I think that especially with queerness, because of the fungible nature of queerness, I like to invite these people in, but make it clear that they are guests who can find a home here, but that I'm not catering to them, that they're not the people who live here.
Yeah, I mean, I think just a small thing kind of the other way around is that when you have a really generalist game and you really don't know anybody who's going to walk into it, and there's obviously whatever that group social conventions are going to be. One of the things that's a pretty simple thing that's out there, and it's something I wouldn't have thought about 10 years ago, but now I do, is at least to put in a game something around how people can feel safe, at least red flagging issues, or anytime during a narrative being able to say, look, I just don't want to do that. It doesn't matter. We'll just stop it. We're going to change it and we're going to go back. And it's something at least I'm more conscious of now, and I think most designers can think about how they somehow embed that. There's all a million ways to do it. So I think that's a powerful thing, at least to give people that out. And like you said, Jay, I think it's totally true. You can't account for a group. I mean, and you don't know who's going to walk in. So certainly limits. And I also don't think designers should be too, unless the point of the game is to really go into that, which can be its own really cool thing. Then I wouldn't, don't try to educate the world. Just say, hey, be decent in your game. That's part of the thing I also say is just don't be a jerk in general. I mean, that's important. Don't do torture porn. Just be normal in the ways that we feel like don't hurt other people. That kind of thing. And that's not easy always too. So have an escape valve.
Yeah, totally. We do have a question. I don't know if anybody here is Ace or Arrow, but we have a question from Jason Petrie. I'm so sorry. How is the games community doing in terms of representation of Ace and Arrow individuals? And I myself am Ace and Arrow, and I say that I've never felt particularly unwelcome in the indie game community, at least. I don't know if there are any games that are specifically geared towards Ace and Arrow people, but generally most queer games are friendly, in my opinion at least. I'm not sure if anybody has any of their games where they're like, yes, I put it in right there.
This isn't one of my games, but I just want to mention Sadia BS. They're a designer, they're Arrow. A lot of their games are about aromanticism and thinking about intimacy outside of aromanticism. Just giving them a big plug, sadiabs.itch.io or sadiabs on Twitter. Yeah, so they're a really good resource on that. I think also in general, I've felt a frustration, not even necessarily as as an allosexual and alloromantic person, but as someone coming into the queer space and sort of the queer game space and feeling frustrated by the way in which so many queer games have for a long time been fundamentally tied to sexual intimacy and like romantic expression, and that is changing rapidly, and it doesn't feel that way anymore. But I certainly know when I was getting started in 2015, sort of like messing around with tabletop games for the first time, there was a little bit of a feeling of like, oh, Monster Hearts are bust. Like, oh, Monster Hearts first edition, which, wasn't great about asexuality, or bust. And a lot of things have changed. Avery Alder's done a great job with that, and like with Luke, with folks like Luke Jordan's help. But I think that in general, I'd love to see a community that even more so focuses on like the degree to which all of us have different experiences, and that like I don't think we'll see like I don't know if like saying like, oh yes, ace and arrow representation is like a thing to seek within the games themselves as much as with the designers, but I would love to see just like an acknowledgement that like there are an infinite number of viewpoints in these spaces, and anytime we try to treat one game or one particular approach to games, like even my own games, like my games have an approach to gender which does not always comfortably encompass binary trans people, and that's because of my own experiences, but it is also a limitation of my games, and I wish people could acknowledge that more and feel more like these games can be all of that, and like there can be enough games that they can kind of hit on those broad strokes, as opposed to feeling like there's one game that gets it all of it, or one set of games.
Yeah, and I know a cozy den does say that it can just be purely platonic lesbos snakes as well, which is very fantastic.
Yeah, there's options. I've had people tell me that it's a very ace-friendly game. I've gone back and forth on whether or not I have ace tendencies. I don't know. It's but like, yeah, I mean, you have options to do things that are sexually defined as atypical sexual activities, or just not, would be more under the asexual umbrella of intimacy and relation. So I think it's important to have in games those options when you're talking about intimacy. It would be cool to see more of that in game design in general, even though I like the romantic sexual stuff too. Just like seeing more of like the options instead of just like, I seduce the guard.
Yes. I also
yeah.
Go for it.
I was just gonna say, I don't know if this was successful, but I hope that it was successful. That one thing I tried to do at least in Visigoths versus Molgoths, even though it is partially a dating sim, right? It is built to have that as a focus. I did want to give both ace and arrow players some options if they want to play the game, to try to make it so that in the adventure episodes, that there are things to do that don't have anything to do with that, right? So that if they want to engage with other aspects of the game and just ignore that part of the game because that's not something they want to interact with, that those options are available, and you can have other sorts of adventures that are about other things. So I think that it just kind of depends on like what your game is about, right? If your game is like the core of this game is romance, right? It's not going to be a game that an arrow person is probably going to enjoy unless they want to role play as somebody who's very different, right? Which is also possible. But if the game is not that, right? If it's not like the most important thing about this game is romance, right? Where, for example, with Visigoths versus Molgoths, that's not the most important thing about the game. The most important thing about the game is that you're in a funny, weird alternate universe time travel mall with two different kinds of goths, right? And it has these other elements as well, right? So I tried to make it a little bit modular, right? So that in the different adventure episodes, you could just like get rid of this one plot line and just not even deal with that part. So hopefully, I don't know how successful it was. I'll probably know in like 2 years. I had a lot of play testers, right? I had some ace and some arrow play testers and some ace arrow play testers who said they had fun, but I don't think we'll really know for a couple of years, like, did ace and arrow people generally have fun playing this? We're not going to know for a while, so we'll see how successful it was.
I mean, I had fun. But yeah, Wilson.
Yeah, good. I'm glad.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's so this session is definitely making me want to play that game because I haven't played it yet, so I want to play that game even more now. It's just in general, just hearing more and more about it. But anyway, I think that's a key point, is that whole issue of, like you say, if the game's about sexuality, it's about sexuality. So just make it clear, make it super clear and somehow in the name itself, or at least in, super obvious, so that if somebody doesn't want that, then they won't pick it up. But at the same time, if the game's not really about that, while sexuality is an important part of things, this is like and I don't want to soapbox it too much, but I do get one of the frustrations of a lot of powered, and I don't want to take any one of them, but one of the thing of the whole powered by the apocalypse thing is this ripping off that stuff whole cloth, and you have to really dissect why are the pieces there. And I don't want to speak at all to Vincent Baker's rationale for the sex moves in that game, but for example, when I was ripping that game off just for a home game for something totally different, which that's not important, other than to say you have to look at that and say what makes sense to rip off. Because especially I was playing with some very traditional players, honestly, who are great role players. But the weird thing is this: I had no sex moves in the game, but this is the first game they ever engaged sexually in their characters, and they engaged with non-human characters, so it's a whole weird thing. But if I put sex games in, I think they would have pulled back. And it just comes back to how do you privilege behaviors and let those behaviors happen, which I would never expect those behaviors take off in that game. And so it just comes back to thinking about, when you take a game design, just please think about it and don't rip off Powered by the Apocalypse because it's all there.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, I think one of the most important tools if you're an ace or error person playing a role-playing game is having those safety tools where you can pull an X card, where you can just say, I'm not comfortable with this, I don't want to do this scene, and I think that's really helpful with, any game in general, but definitely if you're ace or error and you're not comfortable with that stuff, I personally am just fine with like role-playing people who have romantic attraction. I just don't. So, but yeah, I had a ton of fun playing Visigoths versus Molgoths. Both ways. We romanced some people. We became best friends with some people, and it's a ton of fun. So, let's see. We don't have anything from the chat, but how do you guys feel? Just a general question for everybody. How do you feel queer content is being sort of welcomed in the RPG space in the currently? I know we talked a bit about how indie games are definitely a lot more inclusive than the bigger games right now. But how do you guys feel the sort of tone is currently for queer designers in the space? Because IPR has a ton of queer game books here. We have a ton of queer rep. Is one of the reasons why I really enjoy working here and like looking through just the stock of like really insane amount. I did not know that there is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of RPGs out there that are not Dungeons and Dragons or any of those sorts of games. And then if you go onto itch.io, there are just thousands, which is incredible. As I was looking through itch.io, I know, Kira, your game, body, what do you say, /hack, is like just fantastic. I never ever journaled before I found the like solo journaling games, and that one in particular, as someone who like I'm figuring it out. I'm trying to figure it out. It's a process. Gender's crazy, but we're working towards it. And that one in particular, I had a ton of fun playing.
That's really awesome to hear. I have heard a lot of people have told me they had kind of very personal experiences with that game, which is a game, it's basically a journaling game where for like a month you have a different prompt each day. And it takes place in a cyberpunk future where one of your body parts that you choose has been replaced with a cybernetic part. And it kind of takes you through like all these different questions that you deal with on a daily basis of like how you interact with the part, how you feel about it, how maybe your family feels about it. Do you hide it? How do you feel when you look at it? Do you remember your old part? Like all these kinds of like body feels basically. And I've had a lot of cool gender and trans reactions to it, which was a lot of my intent, but also some disabled reactions as well. I have fibromyalgia, and so a lot of people came back to me like, oh, I have this chronic illness and this made me feel things, and I'm teaching this to my disability class in my college, to kind of get across the way people deal with these issues on a daily basis. And that's cool and heartening to me. So I think to answer your question, independent press is powerful. I think queers have always gotten the independent press power, at least since the printing press was invented. We've had zines forever, I think that's cool. I also think as far as like more mainstream, larger press games, bigger company games, there is also a lot of representation, and I see a lot of queer designers and writers working on things. I've worked on a lot recently. Like I've worked on Vampire, which is like my teenage role-playing game. It's like a special kind of nerding thing when you're like, I played this when I was 16, and now I'm writing stories and vampires. It's like super cheesy. I love Vampire. It's good and cheesy. So I see that happening, but Vampire to me has always been gay, so I don't know if that counts. Like, but I think where it makes the most impact is like in kind of like traditionally like kind of bro gaming like spaces, like Pathfinder and D&D. I think are the two that come to mind that are changing slowly. And I think community-wise, there's always been there's this Venn diagram, right, of like gamer, like TTRPG and LARPers and gay people and the kink and furry scene. Like, I feel like it's like an overlap of like, we have all these same interests and wow, queer people like trying on different identities? No way. And so I think it's like, I don't know, it's weird. I feel like it goes back and forth and like, it's becoming larger now, just as like in the US culturally, it is becoming more socially acceptable to be like out, visible, married, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. And I think there's sorry, Judy, if you want to go.
Oh, I was going to say, I think also we're seeing, I think being a queer designer right now in 2020 has a lot of advantages because we're seeing sort of this enormous boon of queer fans of Critical Role, The Adventure Zone, Dimension 20, this sorts of large D&D podcasts. And I think we're then seeing like people grow frustrated with and disaffected with that and like kind of looking for more. And I think queerness in general kind of benefits from that as sort of a thing that can kind of move through those spaces. I think in general, I feel there's sort of a frustration as a designer of getting locked in as a queer designer that, you get asked to be on these sorts of panels and, you don't necessarily, which, again, no shade to this panel. I'm glad it's happening, but it's hard not to notice how like, most of my friends of color have been mainly invited to like the people of color panels. Like most of my queer friends have only ever been invited to the queer panels. And like, you get these really weird insulated small spaces where, and I think that like, there's still sort of this larger community of designers where you don't necessarily get to have queer only panels of people talking about pick lists or, I don't even, goodness gracious, just, like how to approach, like various approaches to violence and intimacy in games. So like things like that like are things that I think a queer perspective would be valuable in, but we kind of get stuck on these elementary 101 panels. And, I kind of wish that often that the space that like as much as sort of the audience grows, I think especially I wish that like sort of the dialogue wouldn't be so siloed, and that I wish that there were more especially cishet players and also white players, myself included, who felt who were who would set aside our own privilege and step outside and play games and experiences by people that don't overlap with our own.
Yeah, totally. And I think there's also definitely something to be said with like the inherent queerness of being a queer person playing a game. If you are queer and you are playing a game, it's probably going to end up rather gay, no matter how hard you try to not do it. I don't know why you would. It's way cooler over on this side. But yeah, we're it's almost noon. If we want to wrap up, if anybody has any last things they want to say, before we say goodbye to our lovely audience in chat? No? Okay, awesome.
I think Jay's point was a great closing. So I think
yeah,
what Jay said was a great place to close it.
I'll do a tiny plug. If you are trying to find something fun to do in the month of August, I am running a game jam for custom content and hacks of Visigoths versus Molgoths. So if you feel like making your own characters or like making your own mall or like making a totally different game based on the rules or any of those things sound fun to you, you can just go to the game jam. It's on itch.io. It's on the jams calendar. It's called Goths versus Goths. And a bunch of people are signed up. It's just fun. If you want to do that. Should be very gay.
Yes, that sounds amazing. So yeah, thank you guys so much for coming. We'll have more panels tomorrow. And yeah, I'm gonna end the call, and then chat, you're gonna see behind the scenes for a second as I hurriedly end the stream. But thank you guys so much. Bye.
Take care. Bye.